Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I am Ryan, warmly joined this Tuesday morning by Joe Dolan and Andrew Erickson. Joe, thank you so much for making the time. We always love having you on the show. We will dive right in here. We are talking some Week 8 buy low, sell high wide receivers. And we're going to start with our most traded wide receivers segment. And we're going to start with the number one most traded wide receiver right now. And that's T. Higgins, actually, coming off of the bye week. And Joe, I'll start with you. Are you buying, selling, or holding on T. Higgins right now?
No, that he is an absolute massive buy for me right now. He's coming off of a bye, so I'm buying him off of a bye. He had a depressed role. I think he played only 54% of the snaps in their last game when he was playing through the rib injury. But Cincinnati is comfortably back to being a pass-heavy team. They had a plus 23% pass rate over expectation in week 6. So Joe Burrow is obviously getting back to health. And they were a plus 16% pass rate over expectation team in their final 6 games with Higgins last season. And he scored basically over 20 points per game in those games. His value is about rock bottom right now. And I never want to sell a guy when his value is rock bottom, especially when he's on a team that looks like it's getting better. T. Higgins is a massive buy low for me.
Yeah, you had wanted to potentially even include him in our buy low segment. And then I was like, you don't actually have to because he's the most traded guy. So we're going to talk about him anyway. Erickson, are you in lockstep here? Are you buying or are you considering selling or holding?
No, 100%. You got to buy T. Higgins. Look, I think that the thing with Higgins you can't get lost is this is a guy that we've already seen produce wide receiver 2 numbers every single year of his career. Like, he's already done it. So the fact that he's been so bad, all it means is, like, at the end of the year, he's going to be wide receiver 2. Like, that's what he has done at the NFL level. So what does that mean? Well, it means he's going to finish much higher than his wide receiver 60 ranking that he's been so far throughout the year. So how does that happen? Well, it means he's going to put together a lot of wide receiver 1 weeks. So I love T. Higgins as a buy. There are so many receivers that you've been frustrated with that you have on your roster that just flip them to get T. Higgins. Like, that's the move I would make. And I think that T. Higgins is probably one of my most rostered players, like, entering this week if I can get him in a trade coming off the bye week.
He is, ranked in a buyable range, too. He's dropped down to wide receiver 29 in the consensus rest of season rankings. And, again, that's in half PPR. So that's an area where if the person who has him in your league agrees with that ranking, you could make a very compelling offer for that. These are some trades that actually have gone down in my playbook involving T. Higgins. These are all real actual trades. So I want to get your guys' opinion on them, whether we like them or dislike them. And the first one, and Erickson, I'll start with you, is T. Higgins for Sam Laporta. Now, we talked during the running back segment how you're not a big fan of trading for tight ends. Laporta's been quite good as a rookie. Would you trade T. Higgins for Sam Laporta if you needed a tight end, Erickson?
I think, yeah. I mean, if I need a tight end, I think it makes sense to do if you don't want to stream the position because Laporta's kind of having like a breakout, and I think that his role is going to stay steady throughout the rest of the season. And receivers, you can I think you can replace a little bit easier than tight end, different from running back. So, yeah, I think I would make that deal. I think it's fair, but just based on positional need, yeah.
What do you think about that one, Joe?
I'd take the Higgins side. Yeah. I just think Higgins is the guy who's going to look like a league winner by the end of the year. At least more likely to be a league winner out of this, even though Sam Laporta's been great, but I want the Higgins side.
Yeah. Joe, sticking with you, T. Higgins plus Jaylen Waddle for Jamar Chase.
Whoa.
A lot of big names in that
I'll take the Chase side, but I also think Waddle is kind of a buy low receiver. So like normally in those 2-for-1 trades, like I mentioned on the last episode we did, it's somebody trying to trade you 2 potato chips for a cheeseburger, but there's 2 of them. No, but this one's much closer to like real value, but I'd still take the Chase side.
Erickson?
Chase side. Yeah.
It's tough to pass up Chase, but it is a lot of value. It's a fun one. And then the last one here, Erickson, T. Higgins plus James Cook for CeeDee Lamb plus DJ Moore. Again, that's Higgins and James Cook for CeeDee Lamb and DJ Moore.
I think I'd rather have the Higgins and Cook side. I mean, Cook is a running back that you can start. Like that in itself is worth a lot of value, even though he's not without his flaws, with the Bills offense. I mean, he's still good enough to you can play as like your RB2. And again, we talked about Higgins. Like Higgins, I think could be a wide receiver 1, through the rest of the season because he's got ground to catch up to be a wide receiver 2 when it's all said and done. So I like the Higgins side. Lamb has been okay. He's been kind of up and down this year, and DJ Moore is going to be a wide receiver 2 at the end of the year too, because that's his MO. So I would rather take upside with Higgins and shore up my running back spot with Cook.
Joe, how about that one? Higgins and Cook for Lamb and Moore.
I see DJ Moore's a blind spot for me because I never get him right ever. Just ever, and maybe it's because he's never had a good quarterback, but the one thing that concerns me here and why I lean to the Lamb and Moore side is the fact that Buffalo has been kind of sniffing around other running backs. There's been the rumors, Leonard Fournette, and then that turned out not to be true, or at the very least, he didn't actually visit. And I wonder if they still don't trust Cook in like that grinder role when it gets to November and December and the temperatures start falling into the 30s in Buffalo. Are they going to go to more Latavius Murray? Damian Harris is obviously on IR after the scary situation in the primetime game. And I wonder if that's going to give them the impetus to go get a bigger running back, which could hurt James Cook's role. That's the reason I'm going to lean to the Lamb and Moore side here.
Before we move on with the show, let's take a second to talk about Factor. As somebody who's trying to eat healthier, I try not to go out to eat as much as I used to, but I found that it gets pretty tricky to cook from home all the time, especially now that we're all so swamped during football season. Fall is the best time of year, but it's also probably the busiest for us. My solution is Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, which delivers chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals straight to my door. It helps me stay on track with my healthy lifestyle, and most importantly, it saves me time. Factor's meals are fresh, never frozen, and ready in just 2 minutes, so I can skip the grocery store trips and food prep and still get all the nutrition I need. And they've got different categories to best fit your needs, whether it's effortless meals with lunch to go, health-conscious options with Calorie Smart, upscale meals with Gourmet Plus, or even a pure extra boost with Protein Plus. Oh, and they've got tons of breakfast and snack options as well. I love the breakfast ones. Whichever you choose, with Factor, you can rest assured you're making an environmentally sustainable choice. Head to factormeals.com/fantasypros50 and use code fantasypros50 to get 50% off. That's code fantasypros50 at factormeals.com/fantasypros50 to get 50% off. Guys, the other most traded wide receiver right now is Amari Cooper. So Erickson, are you buying, selling, or holding on Cooper?
I'm going to buy Amari Cooper. This is always the move to make. You buy him after he has horrible games because it means that the good game's coming next, because he's always boom or bust every single week. And look, the usage was still really good for him last week, even though he was horrible. He had 2 catches for 22 yards. He had 123 air yards, 45% air yard share. Like, he's still seeing all the downfield targets that you could possibly want in the Browns offense. Now, I know Deshaun Watson hasn't been good. I know PJ Walker hasn't been good, but Cooper got it done against the 49ers in, bad weather. He got it done against a tougher defense. So who's to say he can't get it done this week? Like, again, Seattle Seahawks, like Baltimore Ravens, Arizona Cardinals are some of the matchups coming up for the Browns. I don't think that's a bad spot to try and get Cooper, because you can get him so cheap because people are sick of him. He's like, oh my God, he sucked. But it was like they have a rotating door carousel at the quarterback position. Of course he's going to be inconsistent, but he's still clearly the alpha in that passing game. I just think you can get him super cheap. So for me, Amari Cooper, dominant air yard share this year, 6th overall in the NFL of 45%. So I'm going to buy Cooper.
Joe, what do you think about Cooper? His rest of season ranking right now is wide receiver 17.
Okay, so here's the deal with Amari Cooper. I'm going to both buy and sell him. Okay, here's why. I am going to buy Amari Cooper when he has a home game coming up. And then I'm going to go right back to the trade market and sell him when he has an away game coming up. This is absurd, guys. This is Scott Barrett at Fantasy Points, my colleague, has tracked this over the years, and every year it happens. Over the last 7 years, Amari Cooper averages 78 yards per game and 18 fantasy points per game at home. He averages 52 yards per game and 11.5 fantasy points per game on the road. What are his splits with the Cleveland Browns? 80 yards per game at home, 17.5 DraftKings fantasy points, 54 yards per game, and 11.5 DraftKings fantasy points. Literally the exact same that it's been when it's in his time with the Cowboys and in his time with the Raiders. It is absurd. So ranking him for this season, he would be the wide receiver 10 at home and the wide receiver 44 on the road. He's coming off a road game. And like, I know that sounds so weird, but Amari Cooper literally he needs to somehow hire somebody to drive a U-Haul with his own bed in it to every single road game. He's got enough money to do it. He needs to do that. It is absurd. And at some point, you have to acknowledge that the sample is large enough to say Amari Cooper just does not sleep well at hotels for some reason.
I was just going to say, he clearly hates hotels. Can we get him a sponsorship with Airbnb or something? Like and get his road woes fixed?
I'd like to get like Amari Cooper's like take. I wish a reporter would be like, hey, like, so we've noticed this trend where you're really good at home, but like you don't produce on the road. Like, do you have any like take on that? He's like, he would come back and be like, you know what? I really don't sleep that great in hotels. Like, if he just came out and said that, I'd be like, okay, like we have justification on why he splits so many. He's like, I don't know. Like,
yeah, what's the bed that Dak Prescott is the spokesperson for? Yeah, sleep number. We gotta get Amari Cooper in that campaign and get his rotos fixed. But yeah, because it's not just one team, right? It'd be one thing if it's like, oh, he really likes the Cowboys Stadium. It's three teams now. It's bonkers. We've got some real trades that have gone down here involving Cooper that I will run by you guys. Joe, starting with you this time. Amari Cooper for Dameon Pierce.
Oh, Cooper side by far. I'm worried. I'm scared S-less about Dameon Pierce. I think there is a non-zero chance Devin Singletary takes over that backfield. So no, I want the Cooper side easy.
Erickson, how about you on that one?
So I actually like the Pierce side. Like, and I understand the concerns with Singletary and how more involved he was in the last game before the bye week for the Texans. But didn't we see Alexander Mattison like be more involved before Monday Night Football? Like, these backfields can turn on a dime. And I think that we're overreacting, I think, to one game when it was Dameon Pierce for 5 straight weeks of like straight bell cow usage and Devin Singletary. Because the week before Devin Singletary was more involved, he didn't have a single carry in the game. So I'm not willing to buy it as Singletary's taking over until I see 2 weeks of it. And if I'm a week late, so be it. But I'm not going to miss Dameon Pierce against the Carolina Panthers. Because if he gets 25 carries against that defense, that dude's going for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I like Dameon Pierce, especially with Cooper on the road this week at Seattle.
Next one here, Amari Cooper plus Deontay Johnson for Calvin Ridley plus Joe Mixon. Again, that's Amari Cooper and Deontay Johnson for Calvin Ridley and Joe Mixon. Joe, what do you think about that one?
I'll take the Ridley and Mixon side. Ridley's been a disappointment, and Mixon. I talked on our last episode how I like to target running backs who are underperforming their expected fantasy points. Mixon has drastically underperformed his expected fantasy points in each of the last 2 seasons, so maybe this is just who he is. But a running back with Mixon's role, so few of those guys exist that I'll probably be buying them at every opportunity. And as I mentioned with Higgins, I just think that Bengal offense is getting better.
Okay, Erickson, so which side would you take on that one?
So I actually like the Joe Mixon side. So again, Joe mentioned it about Mixon, how he's like underperforming at like all facets. And we kind of saw this last year too. But what happened last year is he cashed in that regression in that one massive game against the Panthers. That game's probably not going to happen this week because they're playing the 49ers. But the week after that, the Bengals are playing the Bills, who are the worst run defense in the NFL. So that's going to be your Joe Mixon 4-touchdown game, and you want to make sure he's on your team. So get him now. Bad matchup against the 49ers. You can get him super cheap. Get him against the Bills, and I think that he'll give you an RB1 performance that you'll be glad you had him in.
One more here. Amari Cooper and Justin Fields for Bijan Robinson and Chris Olave. And I do just want to mention, we're going to get a little more detail on Olave later. He was arrested last night. It appears like it's not, I don't want to say it's not serious whenever a guy gets arrested. He was apparently going 70 miles per hour in a 35 zone, so reckless driving. As of right now, we're kind of operating under the assumption that he's not going to miss any time for this. So operating under that assumption, and, we'll change our, opinions if things change, but operating under that assumption, Amari Cooper and Justin Fields for Bijan Robinson and Chris Olave. Joe, what do you think about that one?
Well, one trade, and now I don't know if this is a super flex league or not, but there is one player in this deal who, in theory, might lose his job. Like, I think we're a long way from crossing that bridge, but you have to admit Tyson Bagent, a UDFA out of a D2 school, has acquitted himself pretty well in what we've seen of him so far. The Bears offense moved decently. And Justin Fields has a thumb injury right now. I have to take the Olave side of this deal. I have to. I don't think Olave is going to face discipline. We'll see if more details come out. I don't think he will face discipline, but that to me looks like two useful players for a guy, for Amari Cooper in a deal where one of the players might be completely useless for fantasy football the rest of the year.
Erickson, Amari Cooper and Justin Fields, or Bijan Robinson and Chris Olave?
For me, I want Bijan. And so the other guys are just kind of like parts, like Olave or Cooper, like they're both boomer bust wide receivers. I don't really, they're indifferent to which one I have. Like they'll have their weeks here and there. And then Justin Fields obviously comes, I think, with more risk than Bijan. I get people be like, oh, well, Bijan's going to lose his job to Cordero Patterson. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. So I'll take the Bijan side with Olave.
Joe, let's move to our buy low wide receiver segment, and I'm going to spoil yours. It's Devontae Smith, and I bring it up because one of our listener questions was actually, is it time to offload Devontae Smith? So clearly, if you have him in a buy low segment, you're hoping he offloads him onto you.
Right. So here's the deal. First and foremost, Nick Sirianni is the single most reliable greasy wheel squeaker that squeaky wheel greaser that there is in fantasy football. And I know Devontae Smith's been a little frustrated with his role. He also had some uncharacteristic drops in that game against the Jets. There's another factor here for Devontae Smith. A.J. Brown is on an all-time heater. Like literally, A.J. Brown has had 125 receiving yards in 5 straight games. The only other player to do that in the Super Bowl era is Calvin Johnson. So if A.J. Brown does that again this weekend against the Commanders, who he torched for 170 and 2 a couple weeks ago, they've since benched Emmanuel Forbes, then he's going to break the NFL record. And I think they're going to give him an opportunity to do that. But there is a couple of factors here for Smith that I like. Number one, the Eagles are still a pass-heavy team. They are currently tied with the Jaguars for 6th most pass-heavy team in terms of pass rate over expectation. So they're going to come out and they're going to throw the football. Number two, last year, per our data suite, our self-charted data at fantasy points, Devontae Smith had a 29% first read target share, right behind A.J. Brown at 32.1%. That has gone way in the favor of Brown this year. Brown's second to only Garrett Wilson in terms of first read target share at 42.3%. Devontae's down at 22.8%. I think that levels out as the season goes on. The Eagles still aren't clicking 100% well. Jalen Hurts is turning the ball over a lot. He's already turned it over more than he did last year. And it does seem like they're just riding A.J. Brown's heater. But I do think A.J. will cool off a little bit. Devontae Smith is going to emerge as a strong wide receiver too in the second half of the season, much like he did last year for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Erickson, Devontae Smith is wide receiver 16 in the rest of season rankings. Is that too high, too low, or just right?
I think it's fine. Devontae Smith was someone I wasn't drafting a ton of this year because I had concerns about how he wasn't as involved in the beginning of the first half of last year until Dallas Goedert got hurt. And then we saw Devontae Smith just go on an absolute tear, and it even trickled over even when Goddard came back. So everyone was like, oh, like he's going to be fine. And clearly that has not been the case because, it's really hard to feed 3 guys. And if you've noticed too, like while A.J. Brown has had this absolute heater, Dallas Goedert has also been much more productive too. So eventually things are going to balance out. Devontae Smith is going to improve at what he's done so far. So I think that he does make sense, as a buy low, especially because he's getting still a ton of targets. It's an offense you want parts of. Although, Jalen Hurts, his health is a little bit concerning, how he's going to hold up for the rest of the season, the way that he plays. But overall, still want to buy Smith.
Time now for our favorite segment. It's the Uber Eats player we'd give up almost anything for. This week, that player is Erickson's buy low wide receiver, Jaylen Waddle. So, Erickson, what makes Waddle such a great buy low candidate?
Well, first of all, he's on the Dolphins. So you want pieces of this offense, and kind of similar to the Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown comparison, Tyreek Hill's obviously like on an absolute heater, like just commanding the highest percentage of targets in his offense. He is essentially like the main part of why the Dolphins offense has been so productive along with the running backs. But Jaylen Waddle's still been seeing decent usage. You get 19% target share. He's dealing with a back injury on Sunday Night Football. Still was really productive. Caught 6 balls for 63 yards on 6 targets. So it's just like eventually like Waddle's going to have that massive game. Like it's going to come because we've seen it too often from him. Like remember, he's been a wide receiver 1 in fantasy his first 2 years in the NFL. And there's no reason to think that, oh, he's just going to finish where he is now, which is currently wide receiver 35. Like, it's going to regress to the mean, which has been an average for Waddle as a fantasy wide receiver 1. So I think that he's always the guy that I want to buy. It's just going to take one big week from him where he goes for 200 yards because we know that's in his range of outcomes. So I want to make sure I have him for that deal. And then if I want to sell him after that, I can do that. But I want to make sure I'm ahead of the curve on Jaylen Waddle before he has that massive game.
Joe, Jaylen Waddle is wide receiver 13 in our rest of season consensus rankings. Too high, too low, or just right?
It's just right. I am a little concerned about that back injury, but he did get back into the game. I do think it's kind of funny that the three of the buy low receivers that we've talked about so far were the three guys who were going in that second, third round cusp who were drafted as fantasy wide receiver 1s, but were the 2 on their own teams. In Higgins, Devontae Smith, and Waddle, and they're all kind of underperforming. But I think all 3 of them are just massive positive regression candidates. I really do. I think some things have just gone wrong for those guys, whether it be injury, uncharacteristic drops, that I think you just still want to invest in these good teams. Like, Erickson said, Waddle's on the Dolphins. Well, Devontae Smith's on the Eagles, and T. Higgins is on the Bengals. Like, these are teams we want to invest in.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, how like the similarities between them. And, it's not just injuries for them. Like the Bengals have been dealing with Joe Burrow's injury. Yep. And, then you look at like Tyreek Hill, also on an all-time heater just to start the entire season. So, that's an interesting connection to make there. Get food from your favorite restaurants, plus groceries and other essentials delivered straight to your front door with Uber Eats. This football season, stay planted on your couch and get anything, almost anything you need for game day by ordering on the Uber Eats app. Uber Eats, the official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details. Guys, let's move to the sell high wide receivers. Joe, starting with you.
Terry McLaurin. I want to get out of the McLaurin business. Sam Howell is on pace to be sacked an NFL record number of times, and Ron Rivera is going to counter that and say we need to start running the football more. And what you've seen the last couple of weeks with Washington is if they haven't been getting the efficiency in the ground game out of Brian Robinson. So they've been working in Chris Rodriguez more to see if maybe Chris Rodriguez, because we know they hate Antonio Gibson. So they're trying to see if they get Chris Rodriguez as that early down guy. They are trying for something here to protect Sam Howell. Maybe trading away McLaurin backfires on me if they go to Jacoby Brissett. But look, Terry McLaurin to me is kind of like DJ Moore. We know how good he is. We know he can blow up, but he's never been a true like alpha fantasy wide receiver because of bad quarterbacks, bad offenses, what have you. And with Sam Howell taking the beating that he's taking, I think the Commanders are going to try to slow every game down. That's not going to, McLaurin crushes the Eagles historically, and they play the Eagles this week, but I'm just a little worried that Washington's going to try to slow that game down against the Eagles, and it's just going to be a very poor game plan when they had a good game plan last time. I think they're seriously concerned about the beating Sam Howell's taking, and I want out of the Commander wide receiver business.
Do you think there's untapped upside here if Ron Rivera is fired and the natural person to kind of elevate into the head coaching spot would be Eric Bieniemy? If he kind of says like, hey, we want to emphasize getting our best player the ball or whatever it is, do you think that would make you more optimistic on McLaurin?
Yeah, it would. And like the last time they played the Eagles, you remember they gave them all they had, and that Bieniemy had a great game plan. Get the ball out of Howell's hands quickly, get him into a rhythm early, because nobody runs the ball in the Eagles. So that would be naturally the smart thing to do. But man, if Howell gets sacked early in that game, and I feel like it could be a house of cards, but I agree with that. That would be the one thing that would make me concerned about selling McLaurin at this point.
Now, Erickson, your sell high receiver is Chris Olave. Again, just to address it, we put this together before the arrest, happened last night. We are operating under the assumption that there's not going to be discipline stemming from this based on the infraction. Obviously, pay attention to that story and, adjust accordingly. But assuming there's no discipline coming from the NFL, you want to sell high on Chris Olave.
Yeah, because Derek Carr's his quarterback. Like this was my concern with Olave entering the year. I was like, I just wasn't convinced that Derek Carr was an upgrade over Andy Dalton. And I think through 7 weeks, I think I've been proven right, at least for the sample size. Now, Derek Carr, you could say, okay, well, he's dealing with the AC joint injury, the shoulder injury. Does it get better? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not a doctor. But, like, what we're seeing so far has not been good. Chris Olave had 15 targets on Thursday Night Football, and he was a disappointment for fantasy in the first half. Like, he was barely involved in the game. Like, two catches for 17 yards in the first half. Like, how is this going to get better? Unless, do they go to Jameis Winston? I don't know. Because Derek Carr is, like, willing to play through whatever injury he has. They paid him a boatload of money. I think that he's going to still be the quarterback there, and I just think that as long as he's under center, like, you're going to just get more underwhelming performances from Chris Olave. So I'm not convinced that he is going to be the breakout guy that we all projected him to be. I thought that he had a chance to be this year's Michael Pittman, where it was like all hyped up. He's going to break out. Matt Ryan's his quarterback. Like, and I think that the similarities are uncanny. Like, he's seeing a lot of targets. He's seeing a lot of air yards, but it's just not coming together, specifically when it comes to touchdowns. Like, that's the big thing with Olave. Like, he's not a featured piece in the red zone. Derek Carr would rather throw the ball to Michael Thomas in the red zone on like 12,000 fades than go to therapy. Like he's literally obsessed with getting Michael Thomas the ball, and it's the game plan. You know, they have so many of these red zone weapons: Kamara, Taysom Hill, Jimmy Graham. Like, they don't want to use Chris Olave in the red zone. So low touchdown upside overall. I know the schedule looks nice coming up, so maybe you do sell for more after he does have that big week, because it's like eventually you assume he's going to convert on some of these air yards. Like, he's top 5 in overall air yards this season, so eventually he'll have a big game. But I just don't feel hopeful that he's going to be this breakout fantasy wide receiver 1 like a lot of people drafted. So for that reason, he's someone I'm trying to move off of.
Are we really still listing Jimmy Graham as a red zone threat? He has 1 catch this year.
Was it a touchdown? Was it a touchdown?
It was a touchdown, but
how many touchdowns does Olave have? 1. The same as Jimmy Graham.
I wouldn't call either of them a red zone threat currently. Just quickly on Olave, Joe, pulling up his rest of season. He's wide receiver 15 rest of season right now in half PPR. Is that too high, too low, or just right?
It's about right. I'd rather have Devontae Smith, though, who's behind him. So that's one of those things where I'll buy the offense that I know, even though it hasn't been perfect for the Eagles. It's an offense that I know scores touchdowns. Well, Derek Carr is addicted to 300-yard passing games on which his team puts up 14 points. Like, that is what he does.
Well, I think it's interesting to bring up because the guys we talked about, like the 3 main buy lows were Waddle, T. Higgins, and Devontae Smith. Olave or those 3 guys? Like, do you want the good offenses, but
I'll
number
take
2s?
Those guys. Yeah,
I kind of feel the same way. I'm just like, Olave's the number 1, but what good is that doing to me when Derek Carr is his quarterback? It's like, I almost rather have the efficiency with Joe Burrow as my quarterback, or Jalen Hurts, or these top tier passers where Carr is the reason why Olave is struggling. Like, Olave is a great talent, no doubt about it, but Carr is holding him back. Worm, would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. I definitely had Olave not higher than Waddle, but higher than those other guys going in draft season. But you have to just adjust based on what we've seen. And I was buying into the belief that Carr was not great, but an upgrade over Andy Dalton. And he just hasn't been. He's been bad. So at this point, you have to change what you were expecting in draft season. And he has to be behind those other 3, just based on the offenses alone. The last listener question here from Twitter is, who is the best player I can get for Ramondre Stevenson plus either Garrett Wilson or Zay Flowers? So, Erickson, who is the name you're looking at that you think you could be able to get for Ramondre plus Garrett Wilson or Zay Flowers?
Maybe Tony Pollard. You're flipping running backs.
That was the exact name.
Because that's what you got to. Especially if you're trading Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers is a rookie that's like breaking out all over the place. Like, I want something good back for Zay Flowers. And Ramondre, again, he's been underwhelming, but he's still a running back that you can play, catches passes. So he's not a horrible asset to have. So that's what I would say. Tony Pollard, Bijan Robinson. Those would be the names I would go after. But Pollard would definitely be the number 1.
Joe, you said Pollard's your guy too.
That was the exact name I was thinking of. Like, I'm trying to think of like maybe a wide receiver equivalent who might be kind of underperforming a little bit, and I'm struggling to come up with one.
Devontae?
Because right. I was gonna say like maybe Devontae Smith, but like I wanted to shoot a little higher than that in this deal. And Tony
Cooper
Pollard
Kupp maybe coming off of a bad game.
Yeah, Kupp or
I don't think Kupp managers are buying that he had a bad game. He just sucked in that. He had 2 drops. Like,
and he just had a
stole the touchdown from Cooper Kupp.
Could you maybe get Puka Nacua for those 2? Like,
I wish.
But Puka's coming off a heater right now. I just don't think anybody's trading him. Like, so yeah, I could not think of a better name than Tony Pollard.
Yeah,
So
Puka's down at wide receiver 11, like for week 8. I'm trying to pull up the rest of the season rankings here, but he's one of those guys that, like, even if you thought the value was fair on getting him, like, people who have him are so proud that they got him that you're going to have to overpay to get him.
Yeah,
because they're just happy. He's wide receiver 10 rest of the season.
I mean, some of the receivers, I guess. So I mentioned so I was actually I actually thought Devontae Adams. Like, that's who I was actually thinking about, or Keenan Allen coming off kind of another.
Oh, those are good names. Yeah, Keenan Allen's a good one. He comes off, and Keenan Allen just had a matchup with Trent McDuffie, who's a dog. So I think those are really good names too. But yeah, Tony Pollard was the one that immediately jumped to mind, like an underachieving running back right now who has an absolute massive role.
Yeah.
We'll wrap it up there. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. As always, for Erickson and for Joe, I'm Ryan Wormley. We'll see you again next time.